Thank you, Mary. I want to do exactly that. I was driving into Glenties today and I saw the sign on the entrance, the question for this week, how stands the Republic? In a flash, it came to me, the headline of my paper, what I want to say is that it stands for election. If we're going to have an accountable, decentralized, participative democracy, it needs the word democratic, it needs republic, it needs to be democratic, in my mind. There is strength in politics. There is strength in representation, right down to the most local level. It's difficult in politics at the moment. It's difficult for every political party in every country in the Western world. I just wanted to cite three, maybe academics who've just written recently, pointing out some of the reasons why. Olaf Graham, paper recently in July for the Policy Network, just making the very simple point that electorates mistrust the simplistic solutions that policies present. Whether you're on the stimulus side of the argument or on the austerity side of the debate, they actually rightly understand that the national political systems, political parties, don't have the full control over the decision-making or over the market conditions in the nature of the globalized world we have today. Particularly in the European Union, within a single monetary system, and particularly in countries where there's large-scale accumulated debt. And the electorate aren't stupid. The research shows that they're actually sceptical of those who offer easy and pat-handed solutions. And that makes it difficult in politics. Politics that has grown up over 200 years on the easy ideological ding-dong between planned market versus, or planned nation-state control of market versus free market arrangements. They realise that that kind of left-right divide doesn't quite work. Fintan, I read that excellent book, Up the Republic, which you've recently helped publish. What I particularly enjoyed reading in it was your former colleague from Princeton, Philip Petit, who I'd never read before. I found his contribution brilliant, partly because I suppose he's been involved in one of the governments in one of those countries, and rightly comes, like all of us who've been involved in governments in recent years, with a certain contrition and a sense of failure. But I thought his comments about riding the tiger, as he put it, which is not the Celtic tiger in this instance, but the tiger of that new market, financial, international, globalized market system where capital can go from one end of the world to the other in a millisecond, and where labour has a certain disadvantage because it's naturally slower, and naturally capital gets hammered because it doesn't move at all. And his depiction of that policy issues in this world between the human environment systems, the democratic institutions, and the difficulty of riding that tiger of the financial system to make such a system just and equitable and republican in every sense of the word, and at the same time realising you can't go back to just a simple solution where the state creates all the credit institutions and the banking arrangements that one might want. That, as nice as it would be to be iconoclastic and say, sweep them away, the replacement with an alternative financing system to provide for the prosperity of our people is not an easy one. I thought he was really good because he recognised as well that the second constraint, the second obstacle, the second challenge facing political parties at this time is to recognise that such material wealth relies on technological innovation in a world of limited resources, of constraint. And that environmental challenge, as he said, being of equal scale and equal importance and equally difficult for just national governments on their own to manage. Lastly, I suppose, of three recent academics just happened to be reading and thinking about, Anthony Giddens, the sociologist from the London School of Economics, who was one of those champions of the third way, which might have provided some hope in that period, 95 to 2005, of that 30-year cycle of market knows best, give the market the freedom, might have diluted it slightly had it not failed. I mean, Giddens writes very well about, again, coming back, echoing the same kind of points, that the overall aim of third-way politics should be to help citizens pilot their way through the major revolutions of our time, globalization, transformations in personal life, and our relationship with the natural world. The difficulty was, I suppose, Bill Clinton, who really led that third way concept, is that they underestimated the scale of the self-destruct button within the market system. And I think actually what we underestimated as well was not just the deregulation of the financial system, but the deregulation of the media world. Under Ronald Reagan in the 80s, the removal of the need for fairness and balance within media coverage allowed for a hegemony of those who had an interest in the financial system to dominate public debate as well as the financial markets. Or the fact that in the UK, the prime ministers there were cooking dinner for Rupert Murdoch in their own private bedroom above number 10 Downing Street was a sign of how much the control of our public discourse and debate were dominated by those who were in favour of deregulation. And perhaps that's one of the reasons, the very valid question you ask, why there's so little attention paid to white-collar crime in compared to other crimes. Bizarre, at a time over that 30-year period when the instance of violent crime decreased, the instance of imprisonment of those responsible for those crimes or accused of such dramatically increased. I think it's understanding that full environment within which we've been existing political parties is important when you start to consider how we stand for election again and how we stand to rebuild our republic. And I think it's going to have to be fundamentally different. 2008 was a fissure that requires a response, a complete change in the culture and the values in the economic and political system as we govern it and try to regulate it, given the overall complexity. And just last constraint, I suppose, to put on that international aspect of it. We have to remember, you've said in that book, Fintan, that it would be great if we could go back to that glorious period between 1945 and 1980, when the Western economies showed such growth. But the difference is, in that time, we in the Western world, with only 20% of the population, consumed 80% of the resources. The rest of the world is not going to see that as an operating assumption for our children in the next 40 to 50 years. How do you manage in European politics, in whatever country you are, not the retreat, but certainly the advance of the East and the South, which is going to happen, and us holding our position? And how do you also manage that politically in a world where the source of our power, the source of our energy and wealth, that fossil fuels that have driven society for 200 years, we now know we have to leave 4/5 of them under the ground if we're not going to hand over to our children a legacy of a burnt planet. So politics is tough. The environment is not easy. But that doesn't mean that we go another way. That means we start changing our way in how we do politics. I was very privileged to be here 3 years ago when the Taoiseach, and now Taoiseach, then leader of the opposition, Enda Kenny, gave a speech. It was certain of a triumphant entrance. He just, I think, seen off Richard Bruton in an internal schmozzle. And he arrived here like one of those boxing scenes. He came up the middle aisle. We were waiting patiently over the top as the Fine Gael faithful who were gathered in much numbers in the audience greeted their welcoming hero. He set out then the strategy and the narrative and the message that has applied for the first 2.5 years of the government that he has led, that Ireland will be the best little country in the world to do business. I'm not too sure if that is the new way. Yes, we need to be good at business. I come from a business background myself. But I'm not too sure that's going to get us there where we need to go, a new republic. I mean, I know, Fintan, again, I read with real interest where you said you could see the response from the Irish people to this crisis in two different ways. You could see it as a fatalistic surrender in some ways. Or you could, as most people internationally see it, as a sign of a doubting nation, of strength through real hardship and straightness. And the Taoiseach, when he goes abroad, I know he gets that message. I know that in the States, they love him. And that story of people breaking against the hard knocks and getting back, the natural American narrative. I know as well, I'm sure in his EPP meetings, which for too long managed and determined what European policy was, it was decided in the EP meeting because they had a majority in the European Council before they went into the main event. I'm sure in that meeting, The Taoiseach has been feted for the strength that the Irish people have been able to show in the most difficult times. But I think there's a problem. I think there will at some point be a certain silent resistance to our story if we don't stem the series of stories that are going out about us being the best little business country in the world, which didn't stand up and say we will end the double Irish tax break. Because that's not the system we need in this new financial world. It's not right, it's not fair. Which didn't stand up for the financial transaction tax, which is one of the most first obvious policy instruments we should be agreeing to, given the damage that casino capitalism had done to our own people. That allowed Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, get away with saying that we were actually the kind of slightly weak boys in the link in terms of data protection last week. Or that we allowed the horsemeat story to go out there. It wasn't us, it was the Poles, or it wasn't us, it was the Dutch. Or the story that we're going to be the baby infant food formula for China and India, and we'll have to put a lot of the climate change targets we have to aside ahead of that important mission. Those series of narratives in the last 6 months are not going to work for us, I think, in the long run. If we're going to have accountability as a core in a new republic, we have to be accountable to the rest of the world as well. And we have to be part of a new accountability that puts some manners in the financial system and does not allow it to trip us up in a future occasion. I'm going to stand, I hope to stand, for the European Parliament next year. Because I think actually the decisions are increasingly, I've seen it taken in the Parliament and not in the Parliament here at home. And I don't object to that. My republic extends to the 28 countries that we are joined together with. I've seen it work, and I've seen it at close quarters fail. I've seen it actually weak in the context. A lot of the decisions that affected us were determined at G20 level. So I want a strong Europe, and I want a strong Irish voice in Europe, and one that has a certain vision for what we stand for and where we want to go, which is more than just being the best little business country in the world. Lastly, on this issue of accountability, I remember finishing the height of the crisis, and we're still in the middle of it, and it could still go wrong, it's not over yet. But you looking at that proposition for payment would be restricted in the country to €80,000 a year. And my heart said yes. And when you argued the point that we could use the money that we would get from the taxation of people to bring them down to that, to pay for the likes of autistic services for young children, my heart leaped even more to say yes. But my head said, we still live in this globalized world. You know, if there's a risk that we lose the Googles and Intels and Facebooks and Pfizers and CRHs and Gambias of this world, we may not have the money to pay for the welfare of those children, and the funding has dramatically increased in the last 20 years, and we've got to be careful that we don't lose that and risk it. So the decisions in politics are constrained as to how you actually, what you can practically do with certain of the values that you espouse. I think one of the accountability shifts we need to make is a new metric of economic progress across a whole range of different ways in terms of what we measure as success. And it's a difficult job because within it, we're going to have to keep to some way to the track we've set ourselves on for 50 years, which is being a localization point of global capitalism, and at the same time hold what we hold important and dear, the values, not just economic ones, as central to what we measure and do. In terms of decentralisation, again, to somewhere like Glenties, what promise can we give the young people of this town that they will be able to come home from Australia or Canada? What promise can politics give a 16-year-old boy or girl here in terms of what the future may hold? That's the key question of politics in our time. It's not an easy one. No one in the 5 years since 2008, the crisis has fallen, I think have really convincingly articulated a promise that those people could believe in. No one has unfurled a banner that a 16-year-old could easily follow. And I don't know, it's not going to be easy. I read in one of the papers today, the Bishop of Tuam, was it up in Croagh Patrick yesterday, saying we were overconfident. We had excessive belief in our capability, and I think that's true. But I think we also all know that we also have reason to be confident. That compared to where we were 30 years ago or 50 years ago, we are a well-educated and enterprising and capable people. And it's that mix in whatever narrative that we have for those 16-year-olds and 26-year-olds over in Australia is what we need to get right. For me, I'm green. There's a man, Jeremy Rifkin, who has a narrative that I buy into. And it's a story of understanding that as well as that globalization, what's happening in the world I spoke about earlier, there is in fact a communications revolution occurring that is on the scale of all the biggest revolutions we've had in the past. The print revolution, the script revolution, the introduction of the new telephones and other systems in the last century. And that communications revolution will in turn help an energy revolution which is already starting to take place. And it in turn, in a cycle of the way things tend to work, when communications technology changes, you see social revolution or revolution coming with it. And that there's every prospect that that could be an empathetic revolution which recognises the next step we've made up in understanding our psychology and neurology, that we are actually empathetic people. And that's very broad and that's very big, but for me it applies to every town and every village and every city in this country. Because when it comes to driving that revolution and being part of it, there's a role for every town and every village and every city. When we're tackling climate change, there are really big challenges that we have ahead of us. Some could say, well, listen, what's the point of me doing something? Because China is the big problem with all the coal plants, and it is. But you can look at it in a different way. You can look at it actually, this is an opportunity for every village to shine, and for every village to buy into a better new economy that replaces that fossil fuel economy in a way that's labour-intensive and rich. And it's doable. It's a better economy. It's better food for us. It's travelling lighter and more cheaply. It's wasting less. It's being energy clever. It's very practical. It's very community orientated. Like getting a good transport system so people are less isolated in rural areas requires us to pull together. It will not work in the atomised, individualised state that developed in that Gordon Gekko greed is good world of the last 35 years. So I think it's not an easy one to sell to people. We've got it terribly wrong in terms of how we've presented these revolutions as they're happening. But the communications revolution is a distributed one. It distributes access right down to every village. And that's our opportunity, particularly in rural towns across Ireland. To do that, you need, exactly as you say, Fintan, you need strong local democratic institutions. They exist in the non-legal political world, but they don't exist in politics. And I think the real tragedy of what's happening at this present time, as well as the slightly wrong narrative at the head of government, there is no local government real reform. Phil Hogan has gone back to the old way. And I think that's such a missed opportunity when we're reducing water charges and property tax. And now is the time to do it. Everyone, all the research knows that if you return funding capability to local government level, it will be better. We haven't done that. Dermot Lacey, you know that all the international research shows that directly elected mayors in cities deliver better city governance and a better way. And I just see it. I met our new Lord Mayor in Dublin, Oisin Quint, today, a fine, talented politician, only there for a year. Like the last one, a fine, talented like Andrew Montague, like yourself, a series of mayors who all know that we need to move towards direct elected mayors, and nothing happens. They're missing the reform opportunity, and that is the biggest shame about this period of time when we're adjusting. We need participative democracy. People need to engage. Fintan, I'd have to be critical about one thing. I talked to you earlier on about how you won my heart, but you lost my heart at that moment in the GPO when you're saying we should be using a technical administration. No matter how good the people are, the lessons of history are that you never give up power to a non-elected system. That those who promise to free you will inevitably in such situations end up enslaving you. And even if there's referendums with it, the history of referendums in such circumstances is not a good one. And I say that with respect because we're still not out of the crisis. Things could still go awry. And if they do in those circumstances, I think the last thing we should do is abandon politics. For as much as I'm critical of this current government, I left the last straw with a certain sense, just hand the baton on, don't let it drop. This country has maintained parliamentary democracy for a long time, longer than most other European countries, and our interest, remember Brendan Halligan saying this to me, true, our belief and faith in parliamentary democracy goes back before the foundation of the state. That belief in O'Connell is strong in our people still. It's there. You get it when you go door to door. You can almost sense it. And we should not give that up. We should stand for election, or have elections if we're not happy with the governments that we have. But we should never give that up for some alternative short-term technocratic administration. I wish at that time, Fintan, that you had run in that regard. I think you would have got elected. And I think it would have been brilliant. Anyone who's been elected for anything, a local council, a local, broader subset of a local council, has that transformative experience when your mind changes from they should do something to we should do something. And you write in your essay correctly about a republic is something you have to nurture and you have to care and you have to manage, and part of that is standing. And I was thinking those words of what's that, saw Dr. Song, that kind of came to me. I was just thinking about this in terms of what the inspiration it would have given. To win just once, that would be enough. So come all you full-time, small-town heroes, cast away your inbred fears of standing out from the rest, the cynics and the pessimists, the self-indulgent, almost rich, the blatant herders on the ditch. Time is passing, so come on, face the ball, the game is on. I say to you, it's still time to run. I think it's time to stand up for the Seanad. I mean, are we going to be so complacent about our democratic and constitutional institutions that we say we can afford to lose, we can sliver the Constitution into loads of little bits and throw the second house out, when what your essay correctly says, we need mixed institutions. We need obstreperous people in that Seanad. And the history, there is examples. Yeats, I'm thinking of you now as a writer. Havel, Hyde, Pearce. Dave McGonigal's doing a good job in it. Geraldine Kennedy, Conor Cruise O'Brien. Larry was never a journalist, or a novelist, or a poet. But I just put that point to you to make my central point. That in this republic, if we seek to reinvent it, we stand for election. One last point, and again, maybe I'm thinking a bit harsh here, but which is the great joy of someone who puts themselves out in a country position, which is not easy. But there was one article that I read of yours a while ago, which just made me think about something. And it was about the new government, and it was right to give them a good kick for not doing the political reform that they said they would, not fulfilling those 10 fairly simple things you set out in a reform document back in 2010. But you said something, and you said, well, at least they're well-intentioned, unlike a pass lot. At least that's good mind reading, because I let someone know what my intentions are. But it made me think of our own party and our own experience. And I just wanted to give one example of standing by the Republic as I saw it. Because in that election in February 2011, hundreds of people came out for our party canvassing. It was a bit like a political version of the Psalm. Like you're going out into a bullet-riddled world of abuse and criticism, understandable. And we went, in my own constituency and so many others, what we like to do, to every single door. We rang on every single bell and presented ourselves and asked the person who answers, that citizen, what's your sense of things? And tried in a respectful way to set out what we stand for. And I think if there's examples that I've seen in my time, and we lost, and we accepted that with good grace, but actually the standing was honourable and republican in the finest way. And that's why I say stand for election. Thank you.